Hello, everyone, and welcome to the London Ballet Circle and this evening's In Conversation. For those of you joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome. It's an absolute delight to have this evening's guest back with us, Xander Parish. Many of you have known Xander since he was a student at the Royal Ballet School and have watched him go from a talented young boy to the world-renowned superstar he is today. It was 2017 when Xander last spoke to the LBC, and what a lot has happened since then. He's now in Oslo, and thanks to the magic of Zoom, he's joining us from there. And leading the conversation this evening is Mike Dixon, well known to us as writer and critic, and also the man who helped Dame Beryl organize all her material so she could write the incredible autobiography she did. So Xander and Mike, thank you so much for being with us this evening. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, Xander will be happy to answer them. Please type them into the chat box, which is at the bottom of your screen. And if you would give your first name, that would be super. So that's all from me. I am now going to hand over to Mike Dixon and this evening's In Conversation guest, Xander Parish.
Good evening, Xander.
Hi, Mike.
So it's nice to be talking again. I can't actually see you, but I'm going to carry on talking to you. I once wrote that you were the greatest premier danseau noble that these islands had ever produced. And I said that in the full knowledge that many people who'd only seen you maybe in a gala at the Coliseum or elsewhere in London, wouldn't really know the trajectory of your career as it played out in Russia. And the story of how you got there is fairly well known. We will come to that in a moment. But from the very start, I knew that when you decided to go to Russia, that you would be a big success, which is why I used to jump on a plane and go to St. Petersburg for all your major first nights. And you have exceeded my expectations in very, very many ways. But would you like to say something about how that situation came about?
About how I came to Russia?
Yes.
Well, so yeah, as I said, firstly, hi everyone. It's very nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me. It's so nice to be joining you again, since 2017 was rather a long time ago. So it's very nice to be back virtually. And always nice to talk to Mike, of course. So yeah, so of course I was Royal Ballet School trained. I graduated from the Royal Ballet School and joined the Royal Ballet Company. I was in the Corps de Ballet and Covent Garden for 4.5 years before joining the Mariinsky. That came about because, as happens to this day in the Royal Ballet, a guest teacher came to say class for a couple of weeks. Usually we know the guest teachers who we had back in the Royal Ballet, but they're regular guests usually. But we had a new one from Russia. I didn't know who he was, but he set class for us for 2 weeks. And this gentleman was full of energy and really inspired me immediately. His classes were different to what I was used to, and he gave me a lot of attention, which I hadn't been accustomed to. He would often come over and give me corrections and manhandle me physically during the class, and mutter something about a correction. And I was like, oh wow, okay. So yeah, he caught my attention. He was a very hands-on teacher. And on the last day before he was to leave, I simply went to him after class and asked if I could show him some jumps. I had some time, so I was like, yeah, please can I show you some of my jumps? And he very graciously agreed and said, yeah, try a manège. So I did a manège, and he corrected us a few times. Then he said, oh, try a diagonal of double soda bass to the knee, anything he could think of, basically. So I did that. He corrected it. Anyway, this went on for like about half an hour after class had finished, and I was pretty sweaty and red in the face, but I was so happy to have this sort of input. I loved it. It was fantastic. I didn't even know who he was. But anyway, it turned out 6 months later, that same man became director of Mariinsky Ballet. He was Yuri Fateev. And when he became director of Mariinsky, he sent me a message via Alina Kochikora, who he is a mutual friend with. And Alina told me, Yuri remembers you. And if you ever want to find a good coach, maybe you should head over there and work with him. And I thought she was joking or something. I was like, yeah, that's a really nice idea. Whatever. Then anyway, a year later, the Mariinsky came on tour to London, to Covent Garden. And again, Alina came to me and said, I've had a message from Yuri. He says, if you're around, do you want to come and take class at the Opera House in the summer? I was like, wow, okay, sure. So I went and took class in Covent Garden with the Mariinsky dancers and watched all their shows, and that was really exciting. And then on the last day of the tour, Yuri caught me in the corridor and had a quick chat and asked how I liked the shows, how I liked the company's standard. And I said, I felt kind of out of my depth, even passing an opinion on such a thing. But anyway, I said, the company looks great, wonderful shows, thank you very much. It's very polite. And he simply said, come to Russia. And I, after a nervous laugh and without a reply, I kind of got the feeling he was being serious. And so I said, I can't go to Russia. I'm British. That's not going to work out. I can't speak Russian. He said, oh, don't worry about that. We'll teach you. It'll be okay. Come. I said, I'll think about it. I'll come back to you tomorrow. So the next day was the last day of the tour. I think it must have been a Saturday because they finished the tour. And I found him on stage after the show had finished. And I said, look, that's really kind of his offer, but I can't accept. It just felt like it was way too crazy. So I just said, I'm sorry, I can't. And he looked really disappointed. He actually looked genuinely sad. And I just said, I really appreciate your attention, but I can't just up and leave. I want to dance in the Royal Ballet. I'm a Royal Ballet product. I'm a Royal Ballet dancer. I'm English. I want to be here. And thank you so much, but I want to stay at home. And he said, well, yeah, I respect that, but if you change your mind, here's my number, or his email. In fact, he gave me his email address, and went off. So that was that. That was August. August must have been 2009. In the autumn, obviously September, I think, or late August, we started back at work. And the first thing I did was to go and talk to my director, Monica Mason, about that, and just to let her know that I'd been doing class with the company. She knew I was taking class this summer, but I wanted to let her know that what had happened, just in case anything got back to her, just to be polite. And she was generally surprised, I think, that it offered me a job, as I was too. And I asked, maybe it would be an idea if I maybe went for half a year, or maybe we could do like an exchange program or something, just because it was such an unusual offer. I thought maybe something could come of it. But Monica said that it was better if I stayed with the company and stayed with the Royal Ballet style, which is fair enough. But I said, I'd actually like to dance a bit more than just doing my basic Royal Ballet things. And I was doing a lot of spear carrying back then, and as tall young boys do, of course, in any major company, in the bottom ranks. And so I was keen to move on from that after 4 years. And so I asked if there was a chance I could do something better, but obviously wasn't any spaces. It was quite top heavy at the time. The company was full. There were a lot of stars. Carlos, Roberto was always guesting. There was a lot of big names, Johan, etc. So there wasn't much space for a young kid to come up. So I went back to Yuri and said, maybe I should actually come. Might be a good idea just to take the adventure. But Yuri was away on tour. He was in America or something. Didn't reply to me for a month. So by the time he got my message, he replied to me and said, "Great, okay. When are you starting?" I need a visa first. I'm paying for a flat in Covent Garden. Let me finish my contract. So we agreed I would come in January of the following year. So that was 3 months later. This time, 2 or 3 months later, January 2010. And so I got on the plane and hopped over to -15.
Yes. Now you learned a lot from Yuri Fateev, but what did you learn from Monica? while you were in the Royal Ballet?
Good question. Well, Monica was a wonderful director in terms of her hands-on approach to directing every show. So we'd rehearse obviously on stage, all the productions before we did a performance, as the Royal Ballet always does. And I always remember Monica giving personal corrections to everybody, not just the stars, as some people might do, but she paid attention to whoever was doing anything on stage. So she would, regardless of the rank or the importance of the role, if someone's on stage, whether it be a townsperson or the rat catcher or the whoever, it was still an important role. And she actually gave value to every role you were doing. So even though it was maybe something small, maybe I thought it was a role that wasn't even worth thinking about, but actually she'd give you a correction and say, you could think about doing it like this. And I always respected how she would, she really had a good eye for making acting natural. And I credit a lot of what I learned about natural acting to actually those basic corrections that she would give back then. So she would always give a very wise and interesting correction about something very banal on stage. It could be happening. You could be talking about apples or whatever with your townsperson, the town square, Romeo and Juliet, whatever. But if it had a meaning and it was natural, it made sense to the production and it would make the whole picture look correct. So that's one of the things that stands out to me to remember.
The thing is that the teaching styles in the UK and teaching styles in Russia are very different. Now, when you were doing soloist roles, which you did right from the start when you went to Russia, because your first role should have been the poet in La Sylphide, but in fact you were thrown on as one of the troubadours, weren't you, in Raimonda? But we don't have that tradition in the UK, or mainly in Europe even, of giving corrections in heat. Could you explain to everybody what giving corrections in heat involves?
In heat? What do you mean by that? I sound like a dog.
Well, you told me about it, and it was, and I saw it happen in Russia. It's when the curtain comes down.
Oh, you mean after the show, right? Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So absolutely. I mean, it's you have to start breeding animals now. So yeah, back in Mariinsky, there was no unions over there worth mentioning. So you work whenever you're told to work, and you work all the time. We worked all the time, like morning, night, anytime they want to call a rehearsal, they call a rehearsal. So we would rehearse all the time. And if I was doing soloist or principal roles, the ballet master in charge, or usually Yuri, would, the curtain comes down, he's on stage immediately giving you corrections for what you've through the show, and then we'd rehearse it again, try it in costume, still wearing makeup, you're still a bit out of breath, and he'd make you do it again. Try it again, things didn't work, do it again, do it right now, show me that pirouette. So yeah, we would rehearse after performances for sure. I mean, maybe not go up to the studio, or that did happen occasionally, but usually it would be on the stage as the stage crew are peeling off the tape from the lino and rolling it up and clearing the wings. We would be trying our jetés again.
When I've mentioned this to English dancers, principal dancers, they've been horrified that after the curtain has come down, carry on working. But it is about, while the steps are still in your body, you've just had that experience of being on stage. There is value to actually doing those corrections literally while you're still in the costume and the audience is leaving. And I've actually stood in the wings and watched Yuri Fativ kind of go through a manège maybe 10 or 11 times with you, and it was just and this is incomprehensible to a lot of people, but this is the kind of I wouldn't use the word ruthless, but it's that expectation that you will work and work and work to perfect whatever it is that you've been doing.
I'd like to say, I think in Russia, I mean, I don't want to diminish any. I know dancers in Royal Ballet work extremely hard, and they have a tough schedule, and they do work jolly hard. But the level of of commitment required in Russia is something beyond what us as Brits at the back at the Royal or wherever know, because there is no boundary between personal life and work life. You are from Mariinsky, and that is your life.
Yeah.
So you're expected to be at the theatre all the time, and you will you live at the theatre. You don't have an outside life. That is it. If you join them, that's what they expect of you, and that's the level of commitment that they require.
Yes, I think that the idea is that, you know, the training can be, you know, very tough and very almost cruel, but it's actually about expectation. And I think that applies in any country, with any company. It's what's expected of you as an artist, you know, to push and develop. And you were totally focused on that. You were totally focused. I mean, where you lived was literally minutes from the theatre, you know. Sorry?
Seconds,
yeah, absolutely. And it's a tough life. It's a very tough life. And of course, when you got to Russia, you didn't speak the language. You had a few words. And of course, you just didn't know how things were done there. It was a very alienating experience, obviously. And I think most people believed you would fail, because it's a very stressful situation. You know, you are taken completely out of your natural environment. You don't know how the shops work. You don't know how to pay for things. But actually, because you're a very hard worker, I think you got people on side very, very quickly. And so from that point of view, you had a fairly steep upward trajectory through the company. And of course, in anybody's career, there are always key roles or crucial roles that move your career forward, or maybe move your mindset forward. So, and it's not always what appears to be the most important role that is key. It's not necessarily dancing, you know, Siegfried or outbreak for the first time, not necessarily. But what were the roles that you learned most from, Xander, when you were in your first couple of years at the Mariinsky?
Yeah, there were certain roles that Yuri even told me he was using as tools to teach me and to make me strong. Because as he put it, when I got there, I was weak. And yeah, fair enough, I hadn't done anything. So that's a fair assessment. I had very little experience. I had almost zero experience, in fact. Yes, there were quite a few roles that he used to, I'd say, carve a dancer out of me. The first of those obviously was Chopiniana, which obviously in the West you call let's feeds. But Chopiniana was a role that I turned up in Russia on my first day. That first day I flew into Russia, I went straight to the theatre to find Yuri, and sort of found him in the wings. There was a show of Nutcracker going on, and in the interval I saw him in the wings and said, "I'm here. Now what?" He said, "I think you can dance Chopiniana. Go and learn Chopiniana." I didn't know what Chopiniana was. I had no idea what he was talking about. I was like, "All right, okay. Can you tell me which role I should go and learn in Chopiniana?" And he was kind of confused to a frown and a laugh. Turned out there's only one guy in the ballet, so that was kind of funny for him. So that was a role which required a lot of style, strength, and not bravado technique, but a technique of clarity. And there's a lot of, it looks light and easy. It's one of the heaviest variations I've ever danced. The variation for the poet in Chopiniana is everything is down, the accent's all down, the plie is deep, everything is low. You got to bend, move your body, and it makes your thighs burn like you wouldn't believe. You're doing a spin class, to tell you what, Chopiniana will make your thighs burn more than that. So that was the first role he used, because also there was a good deal of partnering in there. And I'd never done any partnering before since leaving school. So I had to learn how to do partnering. And from that day, he said, you're going to do Chopiniana. I had 3 weeks until the show. So I had a lot to learn, maybe 3.5 weeks. But, compared to having not danced anything solo since previous 4.5, 5 years. That was quite a long time before, so quite a short period of time to get ready. And so that was the first role he used, because there were lots of lifts. There were big lifts at Chopignano. I'd never done a pressage since I left school, so there was a lot to. I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to go on stage and let a girl around. You know, so I had a lot to learn. It was strength building, and he in one of the first rehearsals he brought in a couple of the other principals who danced it before, and one of them being Corsuncio, Daniel, mountain of a man, built like this, and Daniel's like, oh, okay, you take, here, stand, lift, use your legs. And, you know, bit by bit, he kind of showed me what to do. And so I kind of, you know, learned, but it was a very steep learning curve. Chopignano was an amazing experience. After that, the second role he used was Guy Pas de Trois from Swan Lake. He told me that it's you know, a very difficult, exposed role. You come out after, you know, 10 minutes of Act 1 beginning and knock out this bravada Pas de Trois, which lasts about 10 minutes, and you go home. It's like all condensed into this little bit, and it's hard. It's very hard for the stamina. Chopignano's tough on stamina too, but not like Pas de Trois. All the boys back in Mariinsky would joke about Pas de Trois, saying, I remember one current principal telling me, who got promoted before me. He said, "Do Pas de Trois badly, and they'll let you do the Prince." It's a really hard role to do well. It's very, very tricky, and so I did that for goodness knows. I did it for the first time in 2010. Then I did it the following 6 years probably till I became principal. And
the interesting thing is that I remember you saying to me once that actually Pas de Trois is more difficult than dancing the Prince, and I kind of understood that, but I think maybe we should look at that variation, because of course there's lots of partnering in Pas de Trois as well. But if Paul could show us the variation from Pas de Trois from Swan Lake, I think it'd be an interesting moment. Well, that brought back memories of lactic acid.
lactic acid. I was just thinking that exact word. That's diagonal when you're doing those 6 double C stones in a row. Man, it was like it could burn.
Yes, anything the Prince does is quite easy compared to that, isn't it? Really, yeah, but it's a key role. It's a key role in your development as a dancer.
Yeah, it built a lot of strength. And Yuri was right. He used to build strength. That was his purpose for making me do it 1,000 times, to build strength in my body, and it worked. It did work.
The thing is, because you have a phenomenal line and, you know, beautiful feet, of course, it really polishes the whole effect of that variation, and it's something that became your stock in trade. In fact, you became the first cast for Pas de Trois for the Mariinsky Ballet, didn't you? Yeah. And of course, it's a very, very important role. Everybody knows it's an important role. And it was So what would you say came after that pas de trois in terms of development? Because you already knew about acting. In fact, I remember Igor Stupnikov writing that only an Englishman could have played Romeo as you played Romeo. Because in Russia, it's a role that's played kind of very much on an emotional plateau, whereas, and they like Romeo to be very sad when he comes on stage at the beginning, whereas you understood the role completely differently, didn't you?
Well, I'd had the privilege of learning it in school. So at White Lodge, we studied Romeo and Juliet, the play. So I did know it's pretty much inside out, which does help. And yeah, I enjoyed that. And yeah, I mean, actually, Romeo came later. So after joined in 2010, Yuri gave me Chopiniana and Pas de Trois as my two sort of strength builders to make me strong. And then the next 3 years, we're doing that. And then he added in emeralds. Balanchine's emeralds from Jules, because that was also, it's considered over in Russia, it's considered the most basic of the three Jules ballets, and the one which you again use to learn the craft of Balanchine. And so that's how he taught me Balanchine.
Yes.
So I did lots and lots of shows of emeralds, the first couple, and those parts were integral to me learning Russian style and technique, and then Balanchine, which we did a lot of at Mariinsky. So yeah, and then later, after about 3 years of that, came Giselle, then Romeo, and Swan Lake, quite close together.
And Diamonds, of course.
Diamonds came later. It came a couple of years later, but
Yes.
But before that, I had to prove myself in Giselle and Swan Lake and Romeo. 3 big ballets were the 3 ones I had to prove myself in before getting promoted.
Yeah, I remember your debut as Albrecht in Giselle, and it was the only time I'd heard an audience laugh, because when you did with the flower,
I died. Oh no, okay. I'm joking.
So you did the stuff with the flower, but when you tossed the flower away, you actually made it into a moment of comedy, and I think that took an awful lot of people by surprise. But it was powerfully effective, and of course it exists on social media. People can actually see that moment. It's because actually you've always had a penchant for comedy. You have a very well-developed sense of humor, but of course the roles that you dance rarely allowed you to show that side of your personality, because they were mainly, tragic princes. I wrote a piece, I think it was last year before, about what makes a premier danser noble. The prince roles, and actually there are, just looking at the international scene at the moment, it's really only a handful of dancers who are genuine premier danseurs noble. There are actually lots of wonderful technical dancers who play those roles, but actually playing them correctly is very, very difficult. So I know I bang on about the prince's walk and run. If you can't walk as a prince, if you can't walk on in Swan Lake and everybody know that you're the prince just by the way you walk, or when you run in Romeo, with that kind of velocity, because you're not actually running, but it's the impression of running, which is powerful. What do you think about in those moments when you have to walk or run? Do you actually think about the walk when you walk on as Siegfried, or you just walk on?
I mean, it's funny because when I was back at Royal Ballet School, Jay Jolly would always say I would run with my feet behind me like this, because I couldn't run. But I guess bit by bit I learned. He was a great teacher. He was another fantastic teacher, actually. I credit a lot to. No, I mean, no. When I go on stage now, I don't have to think about running or walking. If I'm playing the character, then I'm the character, and that character runs or walks in a particular way. If you're the prince, you walk as a prince, and it has to carry authority and it has to be precise and authoritative. basically. And a prince should never be timid on stage. If you're doing Swan Lake and you come on, I mean, just looking at real life, you can look at Prince William or whatever and see how he holds himself. Or say Harry, but I'm not much of a fan, so I prefer to say William. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah,
it's true. It's just that the effect of a run. Ashton always used to say nobody could run like Pavlova, and of course you can't run on stage because it's not musical.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be musical, so you can't physically run, but it has to give the impression of great velocity. Now, you've never danced Marguerite and Armand in the UK, but of course you've danced it, or have you?
I can't think. No, I don't think so. I've danced in lots of places. I don't think
I know, exactly. That was the point I was going to make. You've danced it in Russia, you've danced it in other cities in mainland Europe. But the effect, when Marguerite is dying and you run along the back of the stage with the cloak flying behind you, it's a very, very powerful impression, and it's a very difficult thing to do. It's a really difficult thing to do, to give the impression that you're actually running on stage, because it's a very romantic thing. It's that sense of urgency and passion and all those things, which you do wonderfully well,
Thank you.
But
I'm smiling because I know what you're talking about, but it's what you don't see is when you if you do run properly and give it the passion it needs, when you leave the wing, you got to stop. It's really hard to decelerate. Actually, in that moment, you've got like about 5 seconds before you go down the next wing and come down stage. And so it's a battle to not kill somebody, not hit the lighting rig, and get around the wing into the next wing to go on stage. But no, I mean, I love that moment too. That running is always bum ba ba bum. It's like the music's so powerful right there, and it just carries you. As long as you feel it in your heart and go with it, it's easy. You just run. The music does it for you. As long as you feel the music. If you're a musical person, you can understand what you're doing. It's not hard to do.
That's another thing I was going to mention actually, was musicality. I mean, you're famous for your musicality, and it's it's strange. Some dancers are unmusical, some are musical, and some can be musical in one show and not necessarily in another. But you have had a very good relationship with conductors in well everywhere that you've danced, but in Russia particularly, there were conductors who were very very happy to play for your performances. Do you want to talk about your relationships with conductors?
Really, yeah, with pleasure. I remember when I had that debut performance of was it Chopiniana? I think it must have been. Or was it one before Raimonda? I don't know. Anyway, my first show, Mariinsky, it might have actually been the Raimonda show. Valery Ovsyannikov, who often was playing all the time for Royal Ballet, was there in Petersburg at the time. He came to watch my show just to support me, and I was so touched that he actually, I knew him from London, and obviously I'd been in many shows which he'd conducted, obviously in minor roles, never in anything big, but he remembered me. He knew I was going to Russia, and he came to watch my debut just to see me, and it was so nice to have him there and just see a familiar face from London. And that's just a by comment. But later I became very, very close friends with Gabrielle Heine and Christian Knapp, both of whom are American conductors and who were house conductors of the Mariinsky Theatre prior to the war. And we three lived in the same building, the same Obshchiti, the building next to the theatre, and they were on the second floor, various apartments. I was on the third floor. But yeah, we became very close friends. We would always hang out together, and obviously whenever we went to get a pizza somewhere, we'd be talking about musicality. And I mean, when those two were together, they just talk about music non-stop, so I'd always be involved in the conversation. And especially with Gavi, we became very close friends, and Gabrielle and I would Gavi became, it worked out that actually eventually Gergiev pushed Christian towards the operas and Gabrielle towards the ballets, and so Gavi became basically the number one ballet conductor for Mariinsky, and he'd be with me for all my major shows: Diamond, Sleeping Beauty, Swan Lake, everything on tour in Petersburg. And he was the kind of conductor that would like to learn the steps, not just understand the tempo, but he wanted to know why. And so on the evenings back at home in our apartment building, we would spend the evenings. I would teach him the solos, and he'd be there in his jeans trying to do a girl's solo, trying to learn how the pas de char lands on which count. And yeah, he was very smart like that. And even now we talk very often and discuss ballets, and whatever he's conducting, he'll ask me, so if you start from the chassé, you do the jump, where's the impetus? He always was a stickler for trying to get exactly the right to catch the dancers, like in the coda of Swan Lake, Black Pas de Deux. In Mariinsky, it's a circle of manège. In the West, they do Grand Pirouettes for some reason, but because actually it shouldn't be Grand Pirouettes, it should be manège, because it's not a virtuoso part, as the Russians would say. But they would do a manège of jeté lancé, but you would start. So the conductor would be there, and you would go tombe coupe, bam 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 bam, and he always had to catch you on the floor. And if he missed you, the conductors would often miss the prince, and it used to drive Gabby nuts. So he would spend hours with me trying to in the corridor at home. I would be in my jeans, he'd be in his jeans, and I'd do like a bam bam. He'd try to catch it, and he'd always he explained to me everything about how long it takes for the baton to lower and the music to start. It's not like pressing a tape player, It's quite a funny story actually. Christian, he probably got taken off the ballets because he had an argument with Yuri's wife, who was in charge of rehearsing Le Parc, and she in the rehearsal she had the pianist actually with the tape player pressing play when the girl had to sit down and touch the chair, bum bum, and Christian would say, you can't do that, you got to wait for me to go bum bum. And they had this big argument, and after that he never conducted ballet again. But that's life in Russia, you gotta please the right people. But anyway, yeah.
You actually taught me something about music in the theatre, because you very kindly took me up into the flies above the stage once for the last act of Swan Lake, and because you'd done Pas de Trois earlier on, and you're ready to rock. And Act 4 of Swan Lake is not my favourite by any manner of means, and so we walked over the stage, and of course the best musical sound is above the stage. It's not out in the auditorium. This is where the music goes. And I thought, this is an absolute revelation. I never ever understood that this was the best place to be for ballet music. That was a really educational experience, actually.
Is that are you referring to the metal bridge, rickety bridge across the back of the back of the stage, yeah?
The Johannes Bridge, where the handrail dates back to the time of Petipa. That one, yeah.
Yeah. Great.
That was a revelation, actually.
I once knocked myself out up there because there's a low-lying pipe and there was a light behind it. I was in a rush to get somewhere. Anyway, health and safety.
Yeah, who said the arts were a safe option? But this, and of course, after a while, you started to get roles in ballets like Paquita and Raimonda, that until very recently we saw very, very rarely in Western Europe. And I think Paul has a clip that he wants to play now of one of your variations in Paquita. Look at that now, if we may. that was one of the parts that I really liked you in. You know, I think Ramonda Paquita, it's a kind of they suit you because you smile. In a lot of the roles that you play, you don't smile, and I think it's a part of your performance armory that is very powerful, and it goes back to your sense of humor again, Xander. You know, you do have this kind of ironic detachment about certain things. And of course, you needed ironic detachment when it came to the invasion of Ukraine, because of course you had to take a very big decision. It was a massive and brave decision for you to go to Russia, because it was a leap into the dark. But then your whole life was turned on its head, wasn't it? So could you tell us about your reaction to that and what you did, how you left Russia?
Yeah, so when the invasion first happened, it wasn't quite clear actually what was going on, because it's not the first time there's been incursions and things. You know, obviously Crimea was annexed in 2014, and not much happened around that time. There was a few cries of sanctions and stuff, but nothing really happened. And so it wasn't clear if this was another instance like that, or if it's more serious. But in the few days after, it quickly escalated and became very heated very quickly, and it became very clear that it wasn't like previous experiences. It was different, and the attitude in Russia was very difficult. I was listening to my colleagues. We were in Moscow on a tour bus, and the guy behind me talking about Putin's doing the right thing. They had it coming. In the dressing room, the same thing, this sort of thing, and it became very uncomfortable. And I couldn't possibly support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It was completely unjustified. And in the first few days, things became heated very quickly, particularly when flights suddenly weren't. Again, Europe banned flights from Russia, and there was no way out. There were no flights, apart from enterprising Turkish Airlines charging you $2,000 a ticket. So there wasn't really a feasible way out. So, and rumors started escalating quickly about martial law coming in and the borders being shut. And I just decided it was you don't mess around in those situations. It wasn't it wasn't a decision there and then. That was it. I was leaving Russia for good. Goodbye. I didn't know what was going on, but I figured it was better to be out over the border for at least a few weeks just to see. And there were many of us foreigners who decided the same thing. Several of us left on the bus together. Several days after the invasion began, we got up early in the morning, took a suitcase each, and we all piled into a bus and headed to Estonia. Of course, at the border, we had questions. We had to talk to the security services and to give a story as to why we were leaving and what we were doing. We just said we were going as tourists to see friends in Estonia. Played it cool. All was okay, but it was a very tense time. That day was a very, very tense day, and it turned out that the rumors of the border closing never materialized. But it doesn't matter. If it had done, it would have been made life very tricky. And I say tricky like a true Englishman, rather inconvenient. It would have been very difficult indeed. So I figured it was better to get over the border. So when weeks turned to months, and things only got worse. I could never have expected it was to be going on to this day, almost a year exactly since those tanks rolled over the border.
And of course, you didn't leave alone. You left with your new wife. And
you make me sound like I had an old wife. I've only got one.
Sorry, I didn't mean to mention the other one, but it was. But it was traumatic for Anastasia as well, wasn't it? Too,
both.
Like different reasons. And it's but you sojourned in Tallinn for a while. But
Oh,
then,
settle. That's a generous way of putting it. We went to Tallinn for a few days to get her a visa for the UK, which our marvelous Foreign Office decided not to grant for what was it, Home Office for 4 months. So we had a horrible time, stuck in limbo, not able to go back, not able to go forward. Her European visa was only 90 days, part of which we'd used on tour in Germany the previous December. So she had 70 odd days left on her visa, and we were suddenly stranded without a passport because the geniuses that be who run our visa offices decided to take her passport off her but not give her a visa and not tell her when we were going to make it. I can't tell you the incompetence and the ridiculous situation we found ourselves in, and we paid a fortune for a 5-day service to get her a quick tourist visa, not even a spouse visa, a tourist visa to come to the UK, just so we could go back to Yorkshire, go to my parents and figure out what to do, stay for a couple of months. We weren't going to suddenly, invade the country and claim asylum. And after this 5-day service we paid for, which is still not being reimbursed for, nothing happened. 2 weeks later, nothing happened. A month later, I phoned up the Home Office. Where's her visa? Oh, it's being processed. Please wait. We have to process all the Ukrainians first who are leaving the country. Okay, that's all very well. You can take care of the Ukrainians. What about the spouses of your own citizens who pay the taxes? I mean, I'm all for taking care of the Ukrainians, and I'm glad we stuck up. The UK has been a beacon, in fact, in standing up for Ukraine and sending weapons and taking care of those things they should have been, where France and Germany have been a complete disgrace. And I'm proud of the UK for doing that. But in terms of abandoning their own, or the spouses of their own citizens, I had to eventually, after 4 months, and we obviously had to leave the EU because we didn't have a visa for Anastasia, we went to Georgia. Nina Nashvili gave us refuge in the theatre. Back in Estonia, we weren't even allowed to go and take class with Estonian National Ballet because we come from Russia. They had no Russian policy after the invasion, which is beggars belief considering we'd left in opposition to the war. So we had a whole bunch of difficult things to come against. It was a scary, difficult, expensive time. We had no income. Obviously we left our jobs, but our belongings all back in Russia. Our bank cards didn't work. We didn't have access to our accounts where we had our savings from working back in Russia, of course. It was a very traumatic time. After 3 months, we managed to get her passport back from the British visa centre, which had sent it off to Germany for processing, even though they hadn't bothered to approve her visa, and they said it was impossible to give it back. Thankfully, a very kind gentleman who works in the Tallinn visa centre took pity on us and went around the back channels, called one of his colleagues who works in Germany and got it sent back. If we hadn't done, she'd have been there illegally in the EU, thanks to our marvelous Home Office, which is just, I can't even begin to describe how incompetent they were. And every time you phone up, you're paying like £5 a minute to talk to someone who doesn't know what they're talking about and on hold for 40 minutes. It's just insane. I can't even describe the ridiculous situation we found ourselves in. Eventually, I wrote to David Davis, who's my parents' local MP, and he helped out. Well, I presume he did. He wrote back to me and said he would do what he could. And not long after, Nasia's visa for the UK was approved after 4 months of waiting. And it was
this was a very frustrating nightmare that you had to go through after a stable time where everything was normal and revolved around your job in St. Petersburg. And I can hear the tension and the real frustration in your voice even now, Xander. But now that's been resolved. That has been resolved, and Nasia does have a UK visa now, doesn't she?
Oh, she has a temporary tourist visa, which is at least something. But they wanted to keep a passport for 6 months to give her a spouse visa, and they did. They probably have made a paper airplane out of it. But anyway, pretty all they do over there. I'm not impressed by them at all. It was a very difficult time.
Yeah, clearly it was a very difficult time and deeply frustrating because you feel powerless. and it's and because you took the right decision, you know. But now you're in Norway. You found a safe haven in Norway because there you're a principal dancer with Norwegian Ballet, and your wife is in the corps de ballet. So at least you're together, and you're in a place that is stable. And you've got some performances coming up, haven't you? Christian Spuck.
Spook is setting his version of Sleeping Beauty here in Oslo soon. We've already learned it and we've started rehearsing it. It's a very interesting take on the classic. It's nothing like what I did back in St. Petersburg, but that's what makes it interesting.
Yes,
I've done Petipa, I've done Sergei. It's, you know, back in Mariinsky we had both versions. We had the reconstruction of the original by Vikarev, which was at least 24 hours long, and we had it was great. It was great fun to put on the high heels and wigs and stuff. But you know, the classical version by Sergei, which he reconstructed in the 50s, was one I really loved. It was a beautiful version of Sleeping Beauty, a true classic. I mean, Disney couldn't do it any better. It was beautiful. And you know, but now to do Spook's version will be certainly different and interesting. It's you know, very different. There are no variations for the prince. There's no double tours. There's none of this stuff. So it's all going to be very contemporary and interpretive. It's very, very clever.
and that's going to premiere in the summer. Is that right?
Late spring, early summer, something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's and of course you are also heavily involved with the Segerstrom project in California. Could you tell us a little bit about that place?
Absolutely. So in Southern California, in Costa Mesa, Orange County, there's a fantastic arts center called the Segerstrom Center for the Performing Arts, founded by Henry Segerstrom, who was a tycoon, I suppose, a very wealthy gentleman who built a fantastic empire over there, including this amazing arts complex comprising a huge opera house, 3,000-seater concert hall. They opened a museum just in the autumn, very performance spaces, and they also, his family owns the South Coast Plaza, one of the largest malls in America, which sits behind the theatre. So when I left Russia, obviously I wasn't alone. There were many people who left. One of which was a gentleman who used to work for the Mariinsky Foundation of America for Gergiev personally, and that gentleman went to work with the Segerstrom Center with Elizabeth Segerstrom, who took over from her husband when he passed away. So Elizabeth is Polish, immigrated to America and married Henry Segerstrom. She has great compassion for those fleeing war, and as an immigrant into the US herself and having to assimilate to a new country and leave her own country, she really had an affinity with the situation many of us found ourselves in. And via Chris, the gentleman who left Mariinsky's American Foundation, she invited me to do something with the Segerstrom Center. The Segerstrom Center used to host the Bolshoi Theatre, the Mariinsky Ballet. We used to go there a lot on tour. Maybe once every year or 2 years, we'd go and take a week or two at Segerstrom Center. Big theatre, great place, wonderful place to go on tour. It's near the beach, so all dancers would come back to the theatre completely red as a lobster. I was doing Scheherazade there one year, and when I came to the wings to get warmed up to do Golden Slave, all my friends and colleagues were going, ow, ow, ow. They're all completely sunburnt, and they've been on the beach all day. I've been rehearsing, but the Russians would get drunk and go on the beach. Anyway, that's another story. But that was fun. But so it's a great theatre, fantastic place to perform. And obviously with the war and sanctions, and obviously it's not possible to take the Mariinsky and Bolshoi back to the States at the moment. There's a big gap in the market for classical ballet, and Elizabeth asked if I could fill that somehow. So I proposed several options to to the management there, and one of which was founding a company, and maybe one day in the future that will happen. They're certainly interested because it's a fantastic venue. They've got lots of money in Southern California, but they're lacking in good classical ballet. The Los Angeles Ballet is very good quality, but what I want to do is the Russian classics. So I've obviously learned and grown on in the past 13 years. And so what I proposed for the moment was to bring together all the dancers who left Russia and Ukraine in a show of unity and support, not to stand against Russia. We all love Russia. We are against the war. We are against what Putin's done in Ukraine. His actions have made a mockery of a beautiful country, a wonderful country full of great people. And unfortunately, a lot of his powerful propaganda has, turned a lot of minds the wrong direction. But in reality, Russia is a rich and beautiful country, people who are not dissimilar to us. I say us as a Yorkshireman, Mike. Yorkshire folk and Russians are very similar, open and friendly and kind. But unfortunately, as with any dictatorship and strong use of the media to suppress truth, there's a lot of lies out there, and people have obviously been turned the wrong way. I'm not excusing that, but it's just a fact. So we, as dancers, we wanted to stand together as a reunited force for good, for what we love, to dance the ballet that we want to dance. Yes, in support of Ukraine, but not to the detriment of what we love back home. We all have friends and loved ones, family members still living in Russia. We don't want to have them hauled off for our actions. What we want to do is just show that we can be reunited and support each other. We all taken the choice to stand for what we believe is right. We are against the war in Ukraine. We want Ukraine to succeed and to overcome its invaders. Not because we hate Russia, we love Russia, but because we want Russia to be free as well, free of its current tyranny. It's a very different thing. Many people will emotionally chuck all Russians into the same basket, say Russia's terrible. I mean, yes, I get annoyed if I see now as a gala concert going on with Russians from Bolshoi going dancing in Cyprus. I'm like, they come to the EU. What makes the complete mockery of the European sanctions? And again, Europe needs to tighten its belt, get its act together. That shouldn't happen. Dancers from the Bolshoi theatre shouldn't be doing performances in the European Union at a time when their country, who pays the government from a state theatre, the main state theatre in Russia, who pay their salaries, who they pay their taxes to, is invading a neighbour. That should not be happening.
Totally agree.
It's a complete disgrace.
Yes.
So yes, my project in California was for us to, I wanted to support my friends who'd left. There are about 30 dancers I know personally who have left Russia and Ukraine, half of which probably are still unemployed, haven't found jobs yet, and have been knocking around, doing auditions, sleeping on couches. I wanted to give them some work. So I was able to thanks to Elizabeth's generosity, a very, very kind and generous lady, she's bankrolled our project, and through Chris and his team, we were able to buy them flights, hotel rooms, visas, O1 visas at that, which are very expensive, so they can work in the States, get everyone over and give a fantastic performance. Everyone danced their hearts out, and it sold out in 10 days and had the overflow of people outside watching on a screen. It was that popular. I was very, very proud of that because not for myself, but for the fact that I could help my friends, give them some work, give them a chance to earn some cash. They can pay their bills. I know what it's like when we left Russia and we were stuck. It was a very, very, very difficult time. Those guys who haven't found jobs yet, I really feel for. If I can, I want to help them as much as I can. Whether for whatever reason, whether they were escaping the draft in Russia or whether they're actually against the war in Ukraine, everyone's got their own reasons. Everyone's got different priorities and different things going on in their own lives. But I respect them for taking a stand either way and leaving the country. One of my best friends, he decided to leave Russia a few months after the war began because he finally decided he couldn't in good faith, in good conscience, stay in Russia while they were invading their neighbor. And he applied for a job and got one, thankfully, in Hungary, in Budapest. But obviously he needed paperwork, he needed to get a visa, all this stuff. And so he applied, and it took several months. And his visa arrived, got approved a few days before the mobilization order came out. And lo and behold, he got called up. but he fled to the border in Georgia, joined that 10-mile queue, and I had him on the phone I'd never heard him so scared in my life. We've been close friends for 13 years, and he literally left the car in that 10-mile queue and ran to the border to get over before they would be stopped. And he was carrying our tutus actually for our project in California, funnily enough. But that's what he's like. He's a strong guy. And so carrying tutus in hand and a couple of suitcases, he managed to get himself over and used his savings to pay someone to put him in a car and take over the border, because he can't walk over the border. He's not allowed to. There's lots of... So he had to, there were some enterprising Georgians who would say, $500, place in my car. And he paid, whatever, get out of Russia. And he got over the border. But
so you got your Peter tutus, which presumably you had made in Russia.
Yeah, we had our tutus made in Russia. Yeah.
Did he say that he was going to make them into lampshades when he got into the West? It would work. It'd fool anybody. It's been a terrible time. It's been a terrible time for your friends, and of course you still have a lot of friends who are still in Russia. That's
not many. It's very polarized. To be perfectly honest, yes, I had many friends, but as the war's dragged on and the propaganda in Russia has become stronger and much more divided, it's very, very, very divided.
People believe it, yeah.
Those of us who've left have been labeled traitors, scum, all sorts of stuff you wouldn't even believe. And even Yuri himself will be saying, those of us who left have abandoned Russia in her time of need. If you could believe, such is the twisting of the situation, that Russia is one who's in need, who's under attack from evil NATO in the West, and the Nazis who are invading Russia. It's completely crazy, but that's the power of Putin's propaganda machine.
Exactly. If you control the media, you control pretty much everything. You control people's minds eventually. This is really galling for you, because you received your OBE for services to dance and Anglo-Russian relations, and you have always supported Russia very positively in the media, because, as you say, most ordinary Russians are just like you and me. I mean, we know that. We've experienced that. So I know it's heartbreaking to be put into that kind of situation, but it is what it is. But the point is, I have every confidence, Xander, that you're going to move forward, because you've taken many courageous decisions in your life already, and I think you'll continue to do so. I think it's your morality always overrides any sense of fear or discomfort, and this is I think this is what makes you a great artist. But let's go back to ballet for a moment. We've had conversations before about what is difficult, what appears to be difficult, what is difficult, and we were talking about partnering, and you once said to me that partnering in the White Swan, doing the White Swan part in Swan Lake, is actually more difficult than Black Swan. Now, most people in an audience wouldn't get that. Could you explain why White Swan partnering is more difficult?
I think I probably told you that when I was learning it back in, was it 2014? I'd premiered in Swan Lake. Yeah, I found White Swan really hard when I first learned it. It's so subtle and so nuanced. I found it very difficult physically to get the correct coordination, to get, it's all about the girl. The prince has to be, Peter Martins told me once when he was coaching me for Apollo or something, he said, Xander, the boy has to know when to be invisible and when to be visible.
Yes. And
he was absolutely right. You got to know. Basically, he told me that a lot later after I started learning Swan Lake. But when I started learning Swan Lake, I just tried to do whatever I could to make the girl look good. As long as she was happy, I was safe. I don't just mean that in terms of I mean, like, wouldn't get hit around, you know. But you know, there's some tough ballerinas over there who want everything perfect, of course, and I wanted to do it right. As a young dancer back then, it was he didn't speak much Russian. It was hard to do that sometimes. So I needed to make sure I did it right. I really tried. But I found White Swan very taxing. It's long. It's like 12 minutes long. It's a long piece. And it keeps going and going, and it has to have emotion, it has to be beautiful, it has to be a connection. It has to be like a girl. It has to be so smooth. It's like butter. I mean, now I've done it 1,000 times. I could do it in my sleep. But the first 100 were really hard. And I always stressed about that more than even the black part probably, just because it was so nuanced. And you'd be there in the wings waiting for those few seconds before you go back on to walk around the lake, and then she'd meet you on stage. And it was always a nervous moment, like, you know, there's a lot to do. You guys thinking about the choreography, thinking about, yeah, this is when I was younger, I mean, and now it doesn't matter, I can wake up and do it. But like, you know, it was very nuanced.
The thing is, in a big company like that, you're actually partnering a lot of ballerinas, a lot of ballerinas, and they all have their own demand.
That was what was very hard often, because I sometimes forget who wanted what, and they'd be like, "What are you doing?" Oh, crumbs! That was Batova, or that was Skorik. Oh man, sorry, that was Somova or Teroshkin or whoever else I partnered. I mean, I partnered them all, and they all wanted something. Not just them; their coaches wanted something different for their students. So we all have our own. There's a different coach system over there, of course. So each ballerina has their own coach, and that coach wants something particular for her ballerina. And so you got to remember which, you know, who wants what when. And it's, yeah, sometimes that was a little funny, but always fun.
Yes, it didn't show on stage, but it's a tricky, it's a minefield actually. It's a minefield because
But once you've got it, it's beautiful to dance.
Yes.
Once it's in the body, it's a lovely thing to do. I do it very often now, even for gala concerts, because it's such a good addition to any concert. You can show up and do White Swan and rehearse it in 10 minutes with a girl, if you know what you're doing, if you're experienced in it.
Yes.
Not, then it's very hard.
The thing is, of course, and tempi vary because, you know, Makarova started that tradition here in the West of doing White Swan very, very slowly, because that had become the tradition in Russia. And now a lot of ballerinas want to do it at that speed. But really, the music shouldn't be quite so slow. This is what extends the pas de deux. If you actually look at the metronome markings for the music, you realize that Tchaikovsky wasn't doing this. You know, this is kind of ballerina speed. It's not Tchaikovsky speed. And John Lanchbury actually refused to play so slowly. When Makarova first came to the West and was doing it beautifully, she was doing it beautifully, but she knew what she was doing with it. It's a kind of, I don't think audiences generally realize what a bareback ride it is, with, you know, what the ballerina wants, what the conductor wants. You know, they all want something different. And as you say, when you've done it so many times, partnered so many ballerinas in the same choreography, you develop a kind of fifth sense, sixth sense to, you know, how to partner somebody in a way that she finds agreeable. But it's and diamonds too. What could you say about the partnering in diamonds?
Oh, that was wonderful. You know, when I first learned diamonds, done it a few times, suddenly someone got injured or something, and I had to dance it 3 times in a week with 3 different girls.
Whoa.
I think that's, Yuri was impressed, because I think no one had done that before at Mariinsky. And I had who did I dance with? I had Christina Chaperan, Victoria Teroshkina, and Alina Somova, all within a few days of each other, like every other day or something. And it was great fun. But diamonds was one of my favorites, especially the adagio.
Yes.
The balancing trust, call it the pas de deux, but it's not a pas de deux because there are no solos. Anyway, gripe over. So that's adagio, and the adagio is absolutely wonderful to dance. It's such a beautiful thing, such a conversation. Balanchine was such a master of choreography is complicated, but it makes perfect sense. And
Yes.
once you've learnt it and know what you're doing, it does it by itself. It's amazing. You're doing this complicated stuff and it just happens before your eyes. And sometimes you'd be like, how am I even doing this? It just happens because it's so well crafted.
Yes. Yes. And I think with Balanchine, it's about, because everything's built on the musical score, on the structure of the music, the structure of the choreography and the structure of the music sort of are imposed on each other. And this is why I think it makes sense as you're dancing it. It's one of the aspects of Balanchine that I think is most remarkable, that he does that. So 3 shows, Diamonds in 1 week with 3 different ballerinas. You are a diamond geezer. I think we've got to the point in the conversation, Xander, where I think Susan would like to invite people to ask you questions, and you can answer some people's questions. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, sure, of course.
There, I think I'm back.
You are.
Oh, good.
Susan.
Oh, good. Thank you. There is one question in the chat box at the moment. It's regarding contemporary work. You're going to be doing Spuk, which is not your usual. You're known as a classical dancer, a prince, and so on. How do you approach that? How much of that sort of work have you done up till now, and how do you come at it? What do you have to forget, you know, and so you can do this new stuff?
Well, when we began to learn the choreography, I asked if I could watch the video, and the ballet master who was teaching me said, no, Christian has specifically asked that no one see the video. He wants you to learn it from me, so as not to put onto it any preconceptions. He wants you to interpret it yourself, which is fair enough. That's interesting. Very good way of going about it. I thought that was, I don't know, a little hard, because obviously back in Russia we learned stuff by videos all the time. We had a specific room up in the top of the theatre where we'd go and spend hours learning the choreography. You'd never go to a rehearsal without knowing it first. Whereas here, they want you to go knowing nothing, and then they teach it to you. So it's a bit of a different approach. I wasn't quite expecting that. So we, learned from the very, very, very beginning. And it was, yes, it was really interesting, because obviously the music I know inside out. That's many, many, many shows of beauty back in Mariinsky, and then to have the same music with different steps, it was a bit not confusing. I mean, whatever, but at first it felt wrong. It's like speaking a different language. You got to learn it and practice it, and eventually it becomes smooth. But it's I think I'm going to enjoy it a lot when I come to do it. It's going to be interesting, and I'm glad I'm not doing a classical version of beauty, because after Mariinsky's version, I'm not sure what else I could do. It's such a perfected, beautiful version that I know so well. Even when they raise up the orchestra pit and they play that beautiful music, it's just such a great production. I don't think I could. For me, nothing else compares to it. Oh, but I enjoyed the Royal Ballet's version very much. That's very beautiful too. But something about the Sergeyev version, it's just such a beautiful gem. So I'm glad I'm not coming here and doing something maybe I would feel isn't. I don't want to be a snob or anything. I've been very blessed to be in Mariinsky and to have all these great classics that I've done. I would say I've cut my teeth in the classics in the best productions in the world. And I don't mince my words, not just because Mariinsky has those productions, Swan Lake, the Beauty, Nutcracker. What they do is really fantastic. It's very hard to beat. Although I must say I do like Royal Ballet's Nutcracker. But anyway.
There's a question from Liz about learning Russian, because when you went to Russia, you didn't know any Russian. And I'm just going to add now, do you have to learn, now that you're in Norway, do you have to learn Norwegian as well?
Well, technically, according to my visa regulations, yes, but that's not going to happen. I've had enough fun learning Russian. Everyone here speaks English. I mean, everybody speaks English, so it's not like back in Russia where I turned up and I couldn't communicate with anybody. It was rare to find somebody who spoke English when I was in Russia, particularly 13 years ago. Now people do. So young people going from Russia now do speak good English because of the internet. You know, TikTok and YouTube. People do learn English from that. But yeah, I went to Russia pre-smartphone, so you know there was very little English out there. I had no choice but to try to learn. I plastered my apartment in yellow post-it notes, trying to learn different words and sentences and phrases, and to have some pre-prepared things I could pull out of my arsenal and use. Yeah.
Thanks. Fiona asks, can you talk about your collaborations with ex-Mariinsky choreographer Ilya Javoy? Pardon me if I said that wrong. And you're continuing, and she says in parentheses, hurrah, your continuing relationship outside Russia.
With Ilya, yes, absolutely. Ilya's he was in the company when I joined. You know, we were kids in Mariinsky together. He's a very talented guy. He was in the quarter ballet. Maybe, I don't know, a few years after I joined Mariinsky, he started doing some choreography, a few projects here and there. And then he did a good piece for a workshop once, and I was like, oh, that's really good. Then, I don't know, 5 years ago, I got a call from the director of a festival in Switzerland called Origin Festival. And the director asked me if I could, it was a festival for new choreography in a very cool venue, the Red Tower. Maybe you've seen on my Instagram, I've posted about it a lot over the years. Wonderful, wonderful venue. It's a big red wooden tower in the middle of the Swiss Alps. Incredible place, just something like out of a dystopian film or something. It's just amazing. It's like there's nothing in this crazy red tower, and in the middle of it is this circular stage. And they were wanting me to come perform there and asked what I could bring with new choreography. So I said, oh, I've got a friend. He's in the company. He's young. He's up for anything. So I'll ask him. Can we make a new piece? So Ilya made me a ballet, a 50-minute piece, almost an hour, called I'm Not Scared. And it was based on the life of Ezio Bozo, the Spanish composer pianist who had a similar disease to Stephen Hawking's. He lost his ability to communicate and to move, but he could still compose and play. So he, apparently, I've read about this, not sure it was completely accurate, but he died recently, sadly, but he could express his emotions through his music, and it was beautiful music. As Ilya made this piece about him, about his resilience and strength. I mean, now it's a piece that could be interpreted differently, but in the current circumstances and climate. But that piece was the launching of mine and Ilya's relationship as a duo in terms of working together. And I took Ilya there to Switzerland, and then we went back there together to do subsequent festivals at the same place, or the same organization. They have an 11th century castle as well, so we danced in there as well, a new project. So we've done four or five different projects together, back at Mariinsky too as well. So we've had a lot of fun together. Ilya's, of course, involved. I've invited him to be in my team to go to California. Naturally, he will be making some short new works for our next performances in California in July, one of which I'll be in. And I'm always excited to work with him. He's a big talent.
That's fabulous. Yana asks, how difficult was it to adjust to a smaller ballet company in new environment?
Yeah, good question. It was like changing sport. Having played football, going to play basketball or something, it's completely different. It's so different. But I mean, nothing compares to the Mariinsky in terms of its administration. I mean, how it's physically put together and the amount of work you do there. It's a factory. It's a complete factory of the highest quality and standard, but it's a factory. It churned out 40 shows a month, ballet. Probably the same for orchestra and opera as well, concerts and stuff. They were aiming for 1,000 shows a year by the time I left, and over their various venues, Mariinsky 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so we had a lot of venues to fill. And it was a crazy place. So yeah, I loved it. It was amazing. But coming to Norway and suddenly, you got Saturday and Sunday free. You're like, Hang on, what do you mean? You got two days off? Are you? I'd get 2 days off maybe in a blue moon. I'm actually no, that's not even true. If it's a blue moon, it wouldn't be 2 days off, maybe half a day. But you just don't get that kind of downtime at Mariinsky. But in a way, that's how they maintain that level and the standard. It's a very different ball game here. It's a much more socialist country, and Russia is much more about you put in the work and you get the results. So.
Angie asks, were the Mariinsky good at looking after and protecting their dancers from injury?
Wait for laughing. No, it's just weird. No.
Okay.
I mean, there was a guy who wore a white coat. Like he gave out paracetamol occasionally. I'm not sure that did much good. But no. But I mean, there were tons of dancers, so next.
Yeah. Totally different to what we're used to in the West now.
But that said, there were fewer injuries.
Why? Why would that be?
Well, I think there's two reasons. Firstly, I think the Mariinsky and Russian companies only train dancers who have the perfect facility from the beginning. And so there aren't issues with lack of facility, which can cause problems later. No one there got injured because they had a lack of turnout or something, or a lack of, they were all flat turned out. They all had perfect facility. So they trained the bodies that could take it. And they were rigorous about that. You can see that from the audition process at Viganova Academy. And then from those who made Viganova, only some of those are making to the Mariinsky. So the cream got to come down into the cream, and then the perfection. Most dancers in the quarter ballet of the Mariinsky could be a principal dancer in any smaller company in the world. The level of the quarter ballet was just amazing. I mean, you read about it in every review when we come on tour to London, talks about the quarter ballet first with absolute correct. That's absolutely right. They are an extraordinary breed. And I'm not taking it away from any other company in the world to have great quarter ballets too, but the Mariinskys and Bolshoi's quarter ballets are really quite extraordinary. And I do think it comes down to the training and the unity of training. A lot of dancers in the West have a mix of styles and inputs from various backgrounds, and it makes some very great dancers, but they don't have the unity that the Russians have. So that's one reason. Second reason would be, I think, in Mariinsky especially, the floors were super sprung, very, very good sprung floors. They had terrific floors. I mean, very, very bouncy floors. They have good underlay with foam pads underneath the floors. So when you jump, it absorbs a lot of the pressure. I mean, Norway here, wonderful theatre, fantastic studios, but the floors are like concrete, and there's a lot of foot and ankle injuries here and a lot of knee problems and stuff. Just saying.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The next question. Did you ever want to be asked to guest with the Royal Ballet?
Absolutely. I asked myself. I went at least once, maybe twice, to ask if I could come and guest, but that was turned down.
Okay, well, we'll put it in the suggestion box.
I think it's a bit late for that now.
Alistair asked, did you learn music or a musical instrument as a child to develop the harmony with dance that you have?
No, I had some piano lessons as a boy, but I hated it. I literally hated it. I could not sit at the piano and practice doing scales. It was the boringest thing in the world. I was a boy who wanted to jump, run around, throw balls, play cricket, football, I could not sit on a bench and press black and white keys. It was my idea of a nightmare. I just couldn't do it. At school, at White Lodge, everyone had to do an instrument, and those who didn't had to sing. So I had to sing because I couldn't do an instrument. So I had to have singing lessons. That was compulsory for those who didn't play an instrument at White Lodge. So I sung, and I'm musical. I have a good ear. I'm always in tune. So yeah, I always loved singing. We had a lot of carol concerts and choir concerts at White Lodge, Guys and Dolls and all these things. We had a great time. I used to love singing those things. So I really had a good time until once I popped my lung, but that's another story. Yeah.
Okay. We're getting late, so I'm going to run through very quickly. Karen asks, coming back to your statement that you had no private life when you were at the Mariinsky, she says, I understand you have to work hard to be a good dancer, to be a good artist. Isn't it also important to grow your own character by having a private life?
Absolutely not. No, of course not. I mean, that's one of the biggest misconceptions I've ever heard. You know, acting is a skill you form by thinking about it, not by doing. You think about a role and you create it in your mind. If you can see it in your head, and but I guess what she's saying is you can't see it if you haven't done it. But that's not true. You read books, you watch films, you can create any role you like out of your mind. It's not by going and doing it yourself. If I want to be Anna Karenina, I'm not going to go and jump on the front of a train, you know? I mean, no, absolutely not. Yeah.
And final question. How do you maintain ballet fitness with so few performances in Oslo relative to the Mariinsky? And do you miss performing as often as you did?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. In fact, because of that very reason, I'm doing a lot more gym work. I'm running. I've just discovered the joy of running. So I'm doing a lot of running at the moment, which I'm really enjoying, actually. I've never really had the need to do any running or anything before. Before pas de trois, I'd always go cycling. Spinning, you know, on a bike to get my thighs burning, to try and emulate the feeling of going through that variation. Go to the gym and spin. And I used to literally cycle as fast as I could. Once I was warmed up, I'd sing the music, bum, 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 and cycle as hard as I could for that whole variation till I was burning in my thighs, and then take a rest and do it again. But so no, now I'm trying to do running, which involves more the whole body rather than building my thighs up. I want to have a lean body still, so I like running. It's good for me.
Yeah. And do you miss having as many performances as you did?
Yes, I do. But I mean, I'm able now to choose a bit better what I can do, which is nice. It's pros and cons. At least now I'm a bit older and have more say of what I want to do. You know, back in Mariinsky, you were told what to do always. You never got a choice. No, that's not a bad thing, but it was never a question. If I asked for a ballet, I'd get the opposite one I wanted just because I'd asked.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. This has been absolutely fascinating. The rapport between you and Mike is very obvious. I know you're friends from a long way back, and that makes for a very comfortable conversation. So thank you. And Xander, thank you for sharing so openly and so generously with us. Your last few months coming from Russia have obviously been very difficult, and you've reminded us that it's not Russians, and that,
well, it is some of them, but it's not all of them.
But it's
picking the right ones.
yeah, exactly. And we sometimes forget that, but we can only hope that things will work out, and we will see the Mariinsky and the Bolshoi and so on back here again, because they have so much to give us. And it would be a shame if that was lost to us, but we have to wait and see. But so thank you so much. I'm sure we're all very happy that you're out for now. You found a home in Oslo, and you found happiness with Anastasia, and we only wish you both the very best.
Well, thank you to you, because the London Ballet Circle has been a big support to me since I was a little kid at Royal Ballet School. So I do appreciate your support, and you've always kept up with my travels and my adventures. And so,
well, you have a fan club here, absolutely. Yes,
very kind. I appreciate it.
So as Xander says, we do support young dancers at Yorkshire and through their schools and that. And there are so many young kids right now trying to follow in the footsteps of the Xanders and Anastasias and that. And we're proud to play a small part in that journey from school to stage. If you'd like to donate to the LBC, please visit the website www.tlbc.org.uk and click on the donate button. Thank you.